Today I'm going to show you how I make flat mix. Now flat mix is basically the stuff I use for starting seeds for the garden basically, and most of the other potted things I keep in the greenhouse end up going into a mix like this. There are good reasons to make your own flat mix. Basically you can't buy anything that is equal to this in quality. This stuff is very rich. It's made from a wide diversity of materials. It will carry plants for a long time. Like I can take even a flat like this, which is only 3 or 4 inches deep, plants in it and grow them to a good size, and they'll still have enough nutrition to get pretty big in here without having to feed them and transplant them or anything like that. Also, since it's very nutritious, as soon as the plant sprouts, as soon as the seed sprouts, it's starting to get good nutrition immediately. And this stuff will grow just really, really nice starts. Probably the closest equivalent I've seen that you can buy is going to be potting soil, basically a high quality potting soil. But that stuff is mostly shredded bark, and I just don't think it's nearly as good as this stuff. So there's various things I'll add, which I'll get to in a minute, but my base is basically recycled flat mix. So as soon as I transplant everything out, I mean, obviously when you transplant, you're taking like a little bit of the soil with the plant and you put that in the garden bed. But whatever's left goes into a storage container until I need to make flat mix again. And I take 2/3 of that used flat mix and I mix in 1/3 of compost. And that's like my base, okay? Now, if you're starting from scratch, like when the first year I moved here, I didn't bring any compost or any kind of plant material hardly, because I didn't want to bring any diseases with me or bugs or weeds that I didn't have here, because this place was pretty pristine when I moved here. So I didn't want to import a bunch of crap from my old place, so I had to start from scratch. You could just buy a bag of potting mix and make that as your starter base and add some stuff to that. And you can also use, either in addition to that or instead of that, you can go out into the forest and dig down under the leaf mold and get the most rotted leaf mold down there. There's going to be like a history built up. You're going to have the leaves from this year, the leaves from last year, maybe like 3 or 4 years or more worth of leaves. But at the bottom, you're going to get the finest, most decayed stuff. Crush that up, sift it through a screen, and you can use that as a starter base. You can also add soil. So that's another good thing to get started with, but don't add more than 1/3 soil, like 1/4 to 1/3 soil, because soil will cause problems in your flat mix. Like it will form a crust on the top, which makes it dry faster. It tends to get kind of soggy because there's not a lot of air that moves through the dirt, but at the same time it doesn't actually hold as much water as organic matter. So having a high organic matter mix is really actually pretty important. And if you notice, you'll get potting soil and it doesn't have mineral soil in it. It'll have like sand, it'll have perlite and vermiculite maybe, but it won't actually have dirt in it. A little bit of dirt is good, I think, but you just want to keep it to a very low proportion, maybe like 1/3 or less. I learned this basic recipe from the biointensive people. That's a gardening system, biointensive gardening. I'm not a huge fan of the system in general. I've learned a lot from those guys over the years though, and including this, and I think this is a really great way to do flat mix. But that said, there's a lot of options. There are a lot of ways to do this, and I don't do the same thing all the time. I just kind of use what I happen to have that I know works. If the compost is really your base, that should really be your base, is a good, well-rounded compost. I mean, something like kitchen compost where you're throwing in all the stuff that you eat and you're throwing in weeds from the garden and some dirt gets in there and maybe like leaves and, all this different stuff. Think of it as a balanced diet for your plants, right? I mean, the compost is like food for plants. And let's say if you're getting just chicken manure or just steer manure, you're getting this like grain-fed manure. The cows have like a monocrop kind of diet, and then it's mixed with straw, and that's it. That's what you get. If you're composting at home, it's a whole different deal. Like you're getting a really good mix of different materials coming in. The rest of the stuff is like icing on the cake. If you have something else to put in, go ahead, and if you don't, it's going to work out okay anyway. So this is an old plastic composter that someone gave me, and I just use it for storing my old flat mix. Every time I'm done with a flat, everything just gets dumped in here. I also end up dumping things like old potting soil, like if I have some potted plants that die or I'm repotting or something like that, I'll just toss that old mix in here too. Here's my compost. I have a half a bucket of compost to a full bucket of used flat mix. And there's a produce sticker. I hate these things. When I shot my deer this year, I left the gut pile out and I went back later, and in the stomach contents there was one of these stupid stickers. I hate these things. Hate them. Here's my compost, and it's been sifted through a 1/2-inch screen. Okay, so there's our used flat mix, and let's look at what else we can put in here. Wood ashes, great stuff. Full of lime, about 30% lime in wood ashes, plus tons of potassium and lots of trace minerals. I would say in a batch this size, I'm gonna put in, you know, a couple handfuls, doesn't matter that much. Unless you put in a ton of it, you're not gonna hurt anything. Also have some coffee grounds, excellent, great source of nitrogen, and kind of a slower release nitrogen too, like slower than chicken manure or something like that. And there's a little bit more coffee grounds. Normally I'd put in a little bit more than that, but that's just what I had next to me and I don't want to go get any more. I mean, that's just good enough. Now I've also been playing with adding charcoal. Charcoal can sap nutrients from the mix at first, so you may need to add nitrogen or just fertilize it more in the beginning. So that's a problem, but I like to have the charcoal, you know, since this gets recycled, I like to have the charcoal in the mix. And it serves a lot of functions. I mean, it holds nutrients and it also makes for like a loose aerated soil, right? I mean, it breathes a lot, similar to organic matter. So actually, since I added that charcoal, I'm gonna add some extra coffee grounds, but this charcoal has been sitting in a bucket for like 1.5 years. So it's gonna be less of a drain on nutrients than fresh charcoal. So if you get really freshly burned charcoal, it can just sap a lot of the nutrients out of the soil until it hits kind of an equilibrium. So I'm gonna grab some more coffee grounds. So I think, you know, another couple handfuls. I was putting some of this on the garden bed yesterday, so I just happened to have a bucket, and I'm going to throw in a couple handfuls. And this is sifted forest duff. So this is going to have a lot of beneficial microorganisms, and it just adds more organic matter. Good stuff. And I'll often add oyster shell. If you have wood ashes, you really don't need oyster shell, so this looks pretty good to me. So again, I just put in, you know, kind of what I have, and that's what I have this time. And it always seems to work out as long as you have that good base of diverse, like a compost made with diverse materials, and put 1/3 of that in and you're pretty much good to go. Just want a little bit of water in here. Keep your eyes out for these. The old fan sprayers work way better because they have smaller holes. And look for this brand, the Ross. These old copper ones are great, and then there's newer ones that are zinc, but I think this company's out of business, and as far as I know, no one really makes good fan sprayers anymore, so keep your eyes out for the vintage ones. Spend a little bit of time to get this mixed up well, it matters. I just usually scoot it from one side of the wheelbarrow to the other, or one end rather. Now this is so low in mineral soil, I mean there's some dirt in it, just kind of makes its way in here, but it'll never, you know, crust over on the surface. It always stays open and porous, so that means the roots of the plants are getting air, which they need, and when I put water on it, it's just going to soak right in. I'm just going to fill up my flat here and plant a few starts for my winter garden. These plants will be good to go until I'm ready to plant them out, and eventually if they get big enough they'll start to run low on nutrition and they'll get stunted and they'll stop growing very much, but typically they should already be planted in the ground long before that happens. So you don't have a lot of good stuff to put in your flat mix the first year, you have to use potting soil, then you can kind of feed this through the years. So one thing you can do is just sprinkle on more coffee grounds on the surface. Now there's a lot of paranoia about using coffee grounds because people think they're going to be too acidic. I've never seen any plant negatively affected by the large amounts of coffee grounds that I use. If you're using wood ashes or oyster shell with it, then you really don't need to worry about it because that would probably neutralize the acidity. But the way that most of us think about acidity and alkalinity is just really way oversimplified, and it's just not that simple. It's like, oh, I know this has acid in it, or it's an acidic material and therefore it's going to do this when I put it on the plants. That goes for a lot of other gardening things. There's a lot of paranoia out there and people acting on things that they heard about because they might be bad. But the other way to look at it is you could act on those things because they might be good. Like in the case of coffee grounds, that's definitely the case. And so you could be missing out on this great resource that you could be using just because you're operating out of fear instead of out of an experimental, like adventurous mindset. So anyway, coffee grounds are great. And you could also soak manure in water and then water the flats with that, like, dilute it a lot. And you can use urine the same way, and either one of those is going to make your plants kick butt. I mean, as long as you don't use too much and kill the plants by, over fertilizing them basically, or building up salts in the flat, you're going to be happy with the results, and the plants are going to be even happier. So this is a real important part of my whole gardening system here, is making this high quality flat mix to start my starts. I start a lot of starts in about February, and then I do another batch in March, and I do kind of stuff throughout the summer. And then in late summer, like now, I'm starting a little late right now, but I start stuff for the winter garden. And I also use it for potting up, plants, like nicer plants that I want to grow really well, and all kinds of stuff. It's good stuff, very important skill to have.